Welcome to the AEN Stories channel.
It started with something small. It always does. The first time I noticed it, it wasn't lipstick on a collar or a suspicious text, it was her laptop. Mia never left it unattended. Not once in the 9 years we'd been together. She was a digital marketing consultant, and that MacBook was practically fused to her. If she wasn't answering emails, she was knee-deep in presentations, analyzing data, or scrolling through design drafts. But that night, as I walked into the living room, she snapped it shut like a teenager hiding something from her parents. The sound of it echoed a little too loudly. "Late emails?" I asked, trying to sound casual as I headed for the fridge. Her smile was quick, rehearsed, the kind of smile you wear when you want to block questions before they're asked. "Yeah, just clients being clients." She reached for a glass of wine, took a sip, and flipped the TV remote in her hand as though nothing in the world was out of place. But something was. That smile wasn't MIA's. Hers was always crooked, a little off to the left, the kind of grin that told you she was too tired to care, her lipstick smudged. But this one, it was glossy, flat, performed. I let it go that night, but my gut didn't. The next morning, she left early for what she called a strategy meeting. I made coffee in the quiet kitchen, Max, our golden retriever, snoring on the tile at my feet. The sun was just starting to bleed through the blinds when I noticed it. Her planner was missing. Now, that might not sound like much, but to Mia, that planner was sacred. She treated it like scripture. Handwritten notes filling every inch of paper. To-do lists stacked with neat little check marks. She never went anywhere without it. And yet, in its place on the table was a receipt. At first, I thought it was a receipt for groceries or gas, but the logo at the top said otherwise. The Grandview Boutique Hotel. Not the kind of place you book a conference room at. This was the type of hotel that offered champagne with your check-in. The kind couples went to for anniversaries or affairs they didn't want traced. I told myself it could be a mistake. Maybe she grabbed coffee there. Maybe she met a client. Maybe I was overthinking. But then I read the details. 2 entrees, 2 glasses of wine, a dessert plate split between 2 people. The receipt was dated last Friday, the same Friday she told me she was working late. I felt my hands tremble. My stomach flipped. The kitchen felt too small, too bright, like the walls had shrunk closer around me. That night, when she came home, she was humming. Not a tired hum, not the sound of someone who'd spent hours in back-to-back meetings. No, this was lighter, carefree. She unpacked groceries, smiled at me, kissed me on the cheek, and asked about my day. Like nothing was wrong, like my whole world hadn't just shifted sideways 12 hours ago. I smiled back. I pretended. But inside, something cracked. The next week became a slow unraveling. Perfume I didn't recognize clung to her clothes. Not the floral scent she usually wore, but something heavier, muskier, almost too bold for her. I found lingerie tags buried in the trash, black lace with prices she never would have spent on herself. And yet, I never saw her wear them for me. Her phone, once left on counters and couches, was now glued to her palm. A new password, quick swipes, locked screens whenever I walked into the room. Late nights became common. Strategy meetings, client dinners, brainstorm sessions. The excuses multiplied, each one thinner than the last. But what unsettled me most wasn't the lies. It was her eyes. When she told me, "Love you," they didn't soften anymore. They stayed flat, glazed, distant, like she was reading from a script she barely remembered. I wasn't her husband anymore. I was background noise, a placeholder. And so, I started documenting. At first, it was clumsy. Notes on my phone, timestamps of when she left and returned, photos of receipts she tried to stuff into pockets or shred in the bin. I checked our bank app, screenshotted withdrawals at odd hours, card charges from places she never mentioned. Every clue was a pin in the map of betrayal. Every note felt like a nail hammered into the coffin of our marriage. But here is the thing, the deeper I looked, the more I realized this wasn't just about cheating, because mixed in with the hotel bills and late night texts were patterns that didn't make sense. Transfers to accounts I didn't recognize. A new line of credit opened under her name. Withdrawals she couldn't have explained with dinners or drinks. This wasn't an affair born of lust. This was something calculated. Mia wasn't just lying to me. She was building something. And whatever it was, it didn't have room for me in it. The night I found the second hotel receipt, denial wasn't an option anymore. This one wasn't even tucked away in her planner. It was stuffed into her coat pocket. Wrinkled like she'd shoved it there in a hurry. Another dinner for two. Another bottle of wine. Another date night she hadn't shared with me. I sat on the couch staring at it for an hour. Max at my feet, his tail thumping against the floor like he could feel the storm in my chest. That was the moment I decided. No more pretending. No more smiling while she lied to my face. If she was going to build a secret life, I was going to dismantle it brick by brick. The first place I looked was our shared bank account. Mia wasn't stupid. Most of her suspicious spending happened on her personal card. But she got sloppy. I noticed 3 transfers labeled consulting fees, all sent to the same account. At first, I thought it was her freelance work, maybe a subcontractor. But when I cross-referenced the dates, they matched perfectly with the nights she worked late. Each transfer was $600, not a round number, not a bill. And the account number, it wasn't tied to any business. I called the bank, pretending to be Mia, and the clerk slipped. It was a personal checking account. Someone was getting paid regularly, and my wife was the one paying them. The next step was harder. I had to see it for myself. That Friday, Mia said she had another late-night strategy dinner. I kissed her on the cheek, told her to have fun, then waited 20 minutes before grabbing my jacket. I followed her car downtown, headlights off, until I was far enough behind to blend with traffic. She didn't go to the office. She didn't go to a restaurant. She went to the Grandview again, the same boutique hotel from the first receipt. She parked in the back lot, stepped out of the car, and fixed her hair in the side mirror. She wasn't wearing office clothes. She was wearing the black dress she bought for a client gala months ago, the one she swore she never had a reason to use. And then he showed up, tall, expensive suit, the kind of man who carried himself like the world belonged to him. He didn't hesitate. He kissed her the moment they met. Not shy, not hidden. A kiss that made it clear I hadn't just been paranoid. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The streetlight above flickered, buzzing like it could hear my heart pounding. I took photos. My hands shook, but the camera didn't care. Snap after snap, proof piling up in my phone. But as I watched them walk inside, hand in hand, something strange hit me. This wasn't just an affair. It was business. They weren't laughing like lovers sneaking around. They were talking fast, serious, almost tense. Mia had a folder in her hand. He carried a briefcase. They looked more like co-conspirators than soulmates. 2 days later, Mia left for yoga. I didn't follow her this time. Instead, I went into the closet. Her gym bag was there, untouched. But behind her shoes, tucked into a shopping tote, I found it. A Victoria's Secret bag. Inside was lingerie I'd never seen before. Black silk, delicate lace, tags still attached. And beneath it, a receipt, paid for in cash. The date was last Wednesday. The same day she said she had to stay late reworking a presentation. I sat on the floor with the bag in my lap, the silky fabric cold in my hands, and I couldn't help thinking, this wasn't spontaneous. This wasn't passion. It was premeditated. That night, while Mia showered, I opened her laptop. She'd changed her password, but I knew her patterns, birthdays, names, phrases she recycled. On the 5th try, I got in. Her inbox was clean. To clean. No personal emails. No flagged items. It was all work. But people don't just delete everything. I checked the trash folder. Empty. Then I checked the drafts. And there it was. A half-written email addressed to J. Carver. The message read, "Everything is moving forward. The transfers went through. He hasn't noticed a thing. Next step is timing need to make sure the paperwork lines up. He'll be at the hotel Friday. Usual time." My vision blurred. My throat closed. This wasn't just about sex. This was about money. Paperwork. transfers, timing, and me. I wasn't just being cheated on, I was being set up. The next morning, I did what I'd been afraid to do. I looked up Jay Carver, not on Facebook, not on LinkedIn, though he was there too, with a polished smile and a resume full of finance buzzwords. No, I found him in public records. He wasn't just some random flink. He was tied to two shell companies. Both had been involved in lawsuits. Both were connected to financial fraud. And suddenly, the transfers, the secrecy, the hotel meetings, they all clicked into place. Mia wasn't having an affair just for pleasure. She was helping him move money. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the folder of screenshots and photos he'd collected. Hotel receipts, bank transfers, drafted emails. I thought betrayal was about being replaced in bed. But this wasn't about intimacy. This was about erasure. Mia wasn't just cheating on me. She was preparing to erase me from our finances, from our home, maybe from everything I thought was mine. And for the first time in weeks, I wasn't just hurt. I was terrified. I couldn't sleep 4 days. After that night in the bar, the memory of the envelope sliding across the table replayed in my head like a loop I couldn't stop. It wasn't lust in their faces, so much as calculation to people doing the arithmetic of other people's lives, and the math always makes me cold. I kept picturing the way Mia tucked the envelope into her clutch, the casualness of it, as if she had just bought a pack of gum. That casualness proved a danger. This thing wasn't messy or passionate. It was planned, rehearsed, executed. Someone had written a script for my life and handed the lead part to someone else. I had two choices: explode and become the story they expected, a paranoid husband, or become the man who dismantled the hypothesis quietly, methodically, like surgery. I chose surgery. I started with the obvious, and then the much less obvious. I pulled every paper trail I could find, not to burn them in front of her like an angry movie scene, but to learn the edges of the plan. I logged into our shared financial accounts, created a spreadsheet, and began to annotate transfers, dates, descriptions, recipients. I pulled credit card statements, printed them, and circled things with a pen until my wrist ached. I found the 3 $600 transfers, same day of the week, same vague description, consulting. I found small cash withdrawals that lined up with hotel bookings. I found one transfer that left our account and landed in an account name. I'd never seen an LLC with a brand name. I chased that LLC into public records and found nothing comforting. Shell company registrations, a PO box, no physical office, and a string of other odd filings. Carver's name appeared in the filings as an officer in one of them. He had the kind of professional sheen from a few to many networking breakfasts, and the LinkedIn profile that reads like a press release. But public records don't lie, and the pattern there looked like money laundering by the way funds moved through multiple accounts and came out considerably lighter. Next I checked insurance. That felt more intimate than a bank balance. I didn't know why, but something told me to look there. It was like my bones were tuned to the sound of paper that mattered. The policy page sat in a folder with our mortgage paperwork, the kind of folder you put in a drawer and assume will be where it was when you need it. When I opened it, my stomach dropped into my shoes. Mia had changed the beneficiary on my life insurance to herself 3 months ago. Not primary and contingent or jointly, but sole beneficiary. There was a signature, mine, except it wasn't mine. My handwriting is blocky. Impatient, this signature had been looped gently, a flourish that I never write. I scanned it, blew it up, compared it to my checks. The slant was wrong. The tail on the R curved differently. I felt the old shallow panic, then something steadied in me. That signature was a line I could follow to a forger, and a forger could be tied to a fraud. The forgery made everything a lot worse. It made this plan not just greedy, but criminal. I didn't confront her. Not then. Confrontation would alert them, give Carver time to shift funds, to cover tracks. Instead, I moved like a man learning to be practical with fear. I booked a consultation with a forensic accountant under the pretense of auditing our household finances. The accountant ran a quick scan of the accounts and called me back with a list of red flags: round number transfers, frequent withdrawals from ATMs near hotels, and transfers routed through an intermediary LLC that, when traced, had been used in several small consumer fraud suits. Get your records safe, she advised. We'll need copies, and be careful who touches the originals. It felt ridiculous to be hiding paper, like contraband, in my own house, but I stuffed bank statements and printed emails into a lockbox, then dragged to my brother's garage and left there with the key disguised in my wallet. At night, I replayed old conversations, like a detective rewinding old tapes to catch a slipped word. I remembered the way she had said he hasn't noticed, as if that was a logistical fact, not a moral question. I remembered small lies that fit the construction of something larger, the leadership retreat that never showed up on any calendar for attendees, the vendor dinner billed to a corporate card I hadn't authorized, the way Shed insisted I not come to her office party because it's for the team. All of it lined up into a map where I was an artfully dropped pin. I set a few traps that were legal and boring. I called our insurance broker as me, asked a hypothetical about changing beneficiaries and what documentation was required. I learned the exact process and the bank routing numbers that would have been used. I used that information to raft together the times and accounts and push that raft into the flood of the spreadsheet. I used the low-level surveillance of technology. I synced the old nursery monitor to my phone and tucked it to face the hallway when she thought she was alone, not to spy on intimacy, but to capture the cadence of conversations, the names spoken, the tone evidence that would stand up narratively other than in the messy emotion of a fight. The feed recorded the Whisper vendor account and moved the charge, and I played that audio back in a secure drive until the syllables stopped trembling in my ears. Emotionally, I moved through phases like tides: shock, a hot spike of anger, cold planning, nauseous memory, then a steadier, clinical sadness. The oldest lived in the back of my mind in sepia, vacations planned together, the messy joy of assembling IKEA furniture, the ridiculous inside jokes. I had to mourn those things silently so I could use the clarity of absence to think. I learned that if I let each memory become a small war, I'd be fighting every day and never organize a single tactic. So I compartmentalized grief like paperwork, filed it under a label, then closed the drawer. Work helped as distraction, but also as practice in strategy. My job required me to write briefs, create logical arguments, anticipate counterpoints. I turned those skills inward and wrote the case against them as if presenting to a skeptical jury. I practiced sentences to say to my father. If it turned out our inquiries touched the company, I scripted documented language, rather than the ragged accusations my heart wanted. The clearer my evidence, the less room critics had for sympathy. The worst weapon an orchestrator can have is people who think the accused must be unstable. I knew that story. I had to make mine unambiguously logical. There were nights I allowed myself small, almost juvenile acts of defiance. I moved the bedside lamp to another table so she'd see it. I left an old photograph of us, the two of us grinning on a fairy face, up on the coffee table, where she couldn't just ignore it. Not to guilt her, that wouldn't have mattered. But these were stitches for me to remind myself I hadn't vanished beneath her plot. I wanted to be visible in my own life even if she wanted me erased. The deeper I dug, the more names surfaced, not just J. Carver, but a pattern of professional associates who cropped up in registration forms and filing addresses, people with businesses that existed mostly on paper. One led, after a few calls and an underused skill set honed by insomnia, brought me to a receptionist who'd seen Carver in offices that turned out to be subleased rooms for tax filings. The receptionist said, offhand, his clients were always in a rush, never from around here. A throwaway line that translated to people passing through, unrouted money. I started building a timeline of meetings and matching them against credit card and ATM pings. People on the outside would call it obsessive. I called it necessary. I also had to fortify myself legally. I met a lawyer who specialized in family law and asset protection, under the pretext of drafting a will and getting our affairs in order. He listened without judgment and then leaned in when I offered the scattered evidence. Forgery changes a lot, he said. If she's forged your signature, that's criminal. If she's using company cards or moving funds improperly, that's embezzlement. We can freeze assets if we act fast. He taught me things I wish I'd never needed to know. Emergency injunctions. How to get a court order to lock an account. How to serve papers quietly so evidence doesn't vanish. We filed a confidential motion to the court to flag transfers on our bank account and to request a preview subpoena to trace the recipient's LLCS. It felt bureaucratic and brutal, but necessary. For the first time since discovering the receipts, I had active defense, and yet there was a human cost. My father, well-meaning, a man who had always chosen peace over conflict, started to look at me like I was a glass of water he could turn away from if its surface reflected anything dark. I knew I had to be careful with him, that he balked at the accusations because of loyalty to Alma. The strategy could collapse into a messy family argument, so I softened my approach with him. No accusations, only questions. Have you seen anything odd with the company cards, Dad? Sometimes vendors get misfiled. Do you ever reconcile charges? I framed it like curiosity. He was a creature of routine and repetition, and the thread of numbers eased him into consideration without forcing him to pick sides. He asked Alma about a vendor charge she'd booked, and when she stammered and deflected, I watched the look on his face narrow into something more resolute. I didn't force him. He arrived at decisions the way a weather front builds, slowly, but I planted seeds. There were moments I faltered. Once, I found MIA's handwriting in a folder that wasn't supposed to exist, a neat note directing a cashier to process under vendor, and I wanted to tear through the house and scream until the neighbors called the police. Instead, I closed the folder, breathed, and photographed the note. Proof, not performative rage. A few days later, I used the photographs and bank statements to obtain a temporary restraining order on moving funds. The court advised freezing certain accounts pending investigation. I felt like I was walking a tightrope between legal prudence and the primal urge for immediate justice, but the legal steps bought me time to gather incontrovertible evidence rather than give them the chance to scrub records. At the same time, I had to consider Carver directly. He was dangerous in a different register, slick, likely with experience avoiding consequence. Rather than try to confront him physically or emotionally, I played to his vanity. I let a planted rumor reach the circles he frequented, that a man connected to a company was suspicious and looking into vendor irregularities. Maybe it was petty, maybe it was risky, but my aim was to watch his reaction. He did what I suspected. He began to change where charges were rooted, and one of those changes left a gap, an account he briefly used that was less protected than the others. That gap let the forensic accountant pull a thread that led to a larger chain he thought hidden. The breadcrumbs were small things: an email to an assistant that used the same subdomain as another LLC, a phone number that traced to a prepaid SIM, and when the accountant highlighted these links, the pattern became legally meaningful. Emotionally, a strange thing happened. I stopped being ashamed of the hurt. Shame is an isolating emotion that orchestrators use to keep people invisible. My shame transformed into a ledger. It became a record of wrongs I could prove instead of a weight I carried alone. When I read the audio of Mia telling someone hell fade, I felt fury that cut clean and a clarity that made my throat tighten but steadied my hands. I bought a notebook, wrote a linear timeline of everything, dates, receipts, snippets of dialogue, and forced myself to voice it externally in small circles. My lawyer, the forensic accountant, my brother. Telling the story out loud to others was like lighting a match in a dark room. Suddenly there was light and the shadows were easier to see. Each time I presented proof, each time someone who wasn't me nodded and said, "We can act on this," the fog receded a bit. One evening, I sat on the back steps, watching the lawn turn silver with moonlight, and I realized something fundamental. The plan they had built relied on my silence and my inertia. They expected me to be that man who grieves privately and refuses to fight. They expected the narrative to close with me retreating into haze unstable, and then walking away with everything. If I had the evidence, the law on my side, and a steady hand, I could not only stop them, but also expose the structure that allowed them to attempt this. It would hurt reputations, and it would hurt my family. It would be ugly, but I couldn't value my privacy over truth when the choice was losing my life's work. So I prepared the final act, not a melodramatic confrontation, but a controlled reveal. I arranged a dinner that looked like normalcy, invited a few people whose presence mattered legally and socially, and prepared envelopes not the kind Carver used, but the kind that held the summary of evidence, prints of receipts, audio transcripts, the results of the forensic accountant's tracing, the copy of the forged beneficiary form flagged by the insurance company. I asked a lawyer to be on standby in case the evening required immediate legal steps. The plan was surgical. The goal was simple: give them the space to explain, while the evidence spoke louder than their narratives. If anyone lied, the proof would be there. Preparation doesn't stop the swirling fear. The night before the dinner, I sat on the floor of the living room, leaned against the couch that had once been the seat of mundane domestic bliss, and allowed a single, honest thing. I was terrified, not of losing money or reputation, but of learning how much people I loved could be capable of cold calculation. I thought of our wedding vows, the small ridiculous promises we'd made under fairy lights, and I grieved for the person I had shared them with. Grief is a messy companion, but it is also clarifying. It taught me I could be two things at once: devastated and strategic, human and effective. When Friday came, I dressed not to punish or perform, but to be credible in rooms that make decisions. I slid the USB drives into my pocket, clipped the printed packets into a folder, and breathed until the world steadied. If the evening ended in legal motions, I wanted it to be because the evidence demanded it, not because I'd lost myself to rage. For the first time since the receipts, I felt like the author of my own next chapter, rather than an uncredited background character. The dinner began with silence disguised as politeness. Mia sat across from me, in a navy dress I hadn't seen in years, the kind of thing she wore early in our marriage when she still wanted my approval. She smiled in that brittle way people do when they think they're controlling the scene. Alma joined her, sliding into the chair like she owned not just the table but the air around it. My father sat stiffly, suspicion quietly gnawing at the edges of his patience. I poured the wine. My hands didn't shake. We went through the motions, plates filled, glasses lifted, trivial conversation about weather and traffic. I answered with clipped politeness, waiting. At 7:30 sharp, the doorbell rang. They both looked at me, startled. I rose, opened the door, and in walked my lawyer, followed by the forensic accountant. They carried folders, not props, weapons. Mia blinked rapidly, her mask slipping. "Daniel, what is this?" I didn't answer. I let the accountant place envelopes in front of each of them, thick with evidence, receipts, screenshots, transfers, the forged insurance beneficiary form with handwriting circled in red, audio transcripts of her voice saying health aid. The silence stretched as they opened pages, scanning, flipping, the truth staring back at them in ink and dates. Alma's face went white first. My father's jaw clenched so hard I thought his teeth might break. Mia, though, laughed nervously, her go-to move when cornered. "This is insane. You've been spying, twisting things. This isn't stop." My voice cut sharper than I'd planned. "This isn't paranoia. This isn't my imagination. This is your handwriting. This is your voice. This is your plan. You weren't just unfaithful. You forged my name. You plotted with Carver. You built an exit strategy where I disappear, and you profit. Don't insult everyone here by pretending otherwise." My father slammed his hand on the table, startling everyone. "Is it true, Mia? Is it true?" His voice cracked between fury and heartbreak. She sputtered, opened her mouth, closed it again. Alma reached for him, but he pulled away, eyes fixed on Mia with something colder than anger, disgust. I slid the divorce papers across the table, already signed by me. "This ends now. You don't get to finish your little scheme. You don't get to make me vanish. You don't get a cent more than the law allows. And every step of this, every forgery, Every transfer has already been documented with the court. You can deny it here, but you can't erase the record. Her hands trembled as she reached for the papers. She looked at me like she wanted to scream, to beg, to curse, but the evidence crushed the air out of her throat. Alma rose suddenly, furious. "You're destroying this family with your obsession." "No," I interrupted, calm but final. "You destroyed it when you thought silence made me weak. You underestimated me, and that mistake ends here." The forensic accountant spoke then, his tone clinical. "We've already flagged accounts connected to Carver. Transfers will be frozen pending investigation. If there are explanations, now is the time." But there were none. Just shifting eyes, pale skin, trembling lips. The rest of the dinner was a blur of papers rustling, chairs scraping, tension vibrating off the walls. Alma stormed out first, her heels stabbing the hardwood, muttering something about loyalty. My father lingered, looking broken, like the foundation of his world had cracked. Mia sat the longest, staring at me with eyes that once held love and now held only rage at being unmasked. She whispered one final line before leaving. "You'll regret this." But I didn't. The house was silent when the door slammed behind her. I sat at the table, surrounded by empty plates and full evidence, and I felt something I hadn't in months. Peace. Not triumph, not joy, just peace. The days that followed were messy. Calls from lawyers, motions filed, whispered family drama. Mia tried to spin a new story, paint me as controlling, paranoid, but the evidence was airtight. The courts didn't care about spin, they cared about signatures, bank trails, recorded words, and I had all of it. Weeks later, as the divorce moved forward and the investigations into Carver's shell companies spread, I sat in my new apartment, a simple space with bare walls and quiet mornings, and realized something that shook me more than the betrayal itself. I wasn't broken. Yes, I had lost a marriage. Yes, I had learned that the woman I loved could plot against me with the cold precision of a stranger. But I had also learned something else. I could face the unthinkable without collapsing. I could take the sharpest wound and stitch it closed myself. Mia thought I would fade. She thought silence would erase me. But she was wrong. I didn't fade. I sharpened. And when I finally walked away, it wasn't as a victim, it was as a man who refused to be written out of his own story. Thank you for listening to this story on End Stories. If you made it here, you know betrayal doesn't just end lives, it changes them. Subscribe to the channel. New stories drop every single day, and there's already a library of stories waiting for you to hear.